Okay, yeah, I think we can get started. There's so much to talk about. So welcome back to Think Travel Payments. This is the third episode. My name is Paul van Alphen, and I'm the host today. Three guests today. Let's do a quick round of introductions. Let's start with the lady, Esperanza. Welcome. Good to see you again. Maybe a quick
Thank you.
introduction.
Yes, so I'm Esperanza Fernandez. I work at MasterCard in the Global Partnership and Segments team, specialized in the travel sector. Nice to meet you.
Yep, a long time industry peer and always good to have you. Thank you so much for joining. Before we go to Suby, Maarten, welcome back. You were with us also for the first session, but so welcome back to the third one, and we have a special treat for you. Anything related to currencies, we'll get to that in a minute, but maybe a quick introduction for those who missed you in the first episode.
Yeah, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Happy to be back on this webinar. My name is Maarten Rooijers. I have my own payment consultancy company since 2 years, and I used to work for KLM Royal Dutch Airlines in various financial positions over 30 years.
Thank you, Maarten, and over to you, Suby.
Hi, good morning and good afternoon to everyone. I'm Suby Valluri, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Finmont. Finmont is a payment orchestration platform for travel merchants, and my experience is in product development and software engineering.
And also maybe good to mention, Suby, that Finmont is making this webinar series possible by sponsoring. Okay, so let's get started. Here we go. Always start with some housekeeping. This is Zoom. So in the Zoom application, there is a Q&A box. So you can ask your questions there. We'll keep an eye on it, but we typically keep the questions till the end. But please do feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A box. This session will be recorded and will be made available to those that registered through a link on YouTube. The team at Finmont will send out an email with the recording, and feel free to share it with your colleagues and your peers. And finally, it's a dedicated page on LinkedIn called Think Travel Payments. If you subscribe to it, then you'll receive also updates on any materials and also any future sessions that will be planned before the summer break, but also after the summer break. Having said that, so the series consists for this year out of 8 sessions, and so we had 2, and we're ready for number 3. Again, there will be sessions before the break and also after the summer break, so stay tuned for future sessions as well. Oh, too fast here. Today's session is about value-added services. So if we go back, so in the first we did a high-level introduction to airline travel payments, and we did a deep dive into cards and alternative payment methods the previous time with Sandra Mianda from Paperworks and with Mathieu Montmessin from Finmont. And so today we're going to go a bit deeper into the process with currency conversion services, MCP, multi-currency pricing, dynamic currency conversion, which Maarten will take on. We'll have a closer look at 3D Secure, and also we'll touch on tokenization at the end of the session. So we split it up in these topics. So we'll start off with a bit of a holistic view on these value-added services, where they come in, and how to connect to them. We'll also have a bit of a look at the payment conversion funnel, because that's always a key component of any discussion around value-added services, and what does it contribute to the overall checkout conversion, multi-currency pricing, dynamic currency conversion, 3D Secure, tokenization, and we end up before we do the Q&A with some industry news that I gathered for you. So this is my diagram on payment orchestration for airlines. It does also apply to, let's say, large online travel agencies or other large merchants. Maybe the channels on the left-hand side might be a bit different there, because airlines do have a wide variety of channels. On the right-hand side in the green box, you see the value-added services. So, but maybe, this is your domain, Suby. From a payment orchestrator perspective, what kind of role do value-added services play other than the multi acquirer routing and unlocking payment opportunities with individual payment providers, how do you bring in the value-added services?
Yes. From Finmont's perspective, we see payment orchestration as a hub which maintains the whole payment flow, whatever the service that you are using, A to Z. For example, it could involve fraud, starting with fraud and fraud prevention, and then 3DS, and then also with the multi-currency pricing, dynamic currency conversion. So basically, all the services that are associated in the payments lifecycle, we want to create like a centralized hub or command center so that you can fine tune and implement your strategy based on your benchmarks. So that's the vision. And as part of the vision, we are connected with multiple fraud prevention platforms, 3DS plugins, and multi-currency services as part of our orchestration platform.
Mm-hmm. And in the blue box orchestration, a lot of the business rules are stored, and the logic is enabled to route transactions and also to determine what's the sequence, right? So
yes, exactly.
If fraud and what kind of fraud screening is enabled, what to do with the response, and then, for instance, to invoke pretty secure or not, depending if that's mandatory or not. But also, for instance, depending on the form of payment, to decide, is it DCC or is it MCP? So a lot of the logic is in that orchestration engine, if I'm right.
Yes. And also, one more thing I want to mention is we also take care of tokenization to secure the transactions, or if there are recurring payments. So you can imagine also, for example, chargeback automation. So there are some platforms that offer chargeback automation services, and those are also connected. So basically, whatever you can imagine, any service that touches the payment, we want to make sure it is integrated so that you have one point of contact to control all these services.
Okay.
And do A/B testing, for example. Do A/B testing, for example, which acquirer is having higher acceptance rates with given conditions of country of origin and all those factors. So so you can see it as a single hub.
Okay. And maybe talking about approval rates, and I just want to, before I hand it over to you later, Esperanza, just have a bit of a chat with you. You do a lot of work on Mastercard side, collecting data, crunching it, and visualizing it and sharing it with the wider community to create awareness. Maybe a bit of background on your role and how you deal with the data and the good work that you do in this space.
Right. So yes, definitely we have access to all the Mastercard data information, processing, authorizations, fraud, chargebacks, clearing. Every data point is obviously collected on Mastercard side, and we do have access to be able to do aggregated analysis level, right? So what we do is at industry level, we collect data and information about the airline industry as a whole, and we run a series of reports, as you said, just to, communicate and expose some of the real numbers that we see in the industry. So airline payment managers can compare themselves against the overall benchmark, and then they can also understand data points based on facts rather than assumptions or ideas. This is pure fact. We try to publish data on a quarterly basis, and again, it's only Mastercard data. Of course, whatever happens with other payment methods, we have obviously no visibility. So this is pure Mastercard data. And yes, we look at approval rates, and when we look at that, we look at first attempt approval rates, but we also look at the final approval rates in case the transactions get retried by the card holders. We look at fraud, we look at chargebacks as well, the reasons for the chargeback, etc. So yes, we have a very good understanding of what's the overall status of the industry, if you will.
Yeah. And you proactively communicate that and also consult with your both the let's say the payment partners, but also with the airlines that obviously all accept Mastercard to communicate about it. I think that's very valuable. Okay.
Yes.
So we'll come back to some of the data that you brought for the session. Very good view on how things work and what the trends are. So let's keep that for later. So having said that, so the first main topic for today is multi-currency services. And again, Maarten, thank you very much for joining. Maybe before we dive into the details, a bit of background on where your passion for this topic comes from.
Yeah, of course, I would love to tell you a bit more about the multi-currency services, which comprises of multi-currency pricing and dynamic currency conversion. Having worked for a long time in the airline industry, one of my previous positions, I used to work within the Treasury Department a long time ago, and there I was a currency manager, so looking after all exposures of KLM in more than 75 currencies, responsible for the cash management part as well. That was very interesting. And when I moved over to the digital department of KLM back in 2005, we had a lot on our plate. And I think that is a nice bridge to the first page of the presentation, Paul, because if we look at the first tile, I used to work, or I was heading the payment department of KLM, and we often payment departments are always very busy with things they have to do. For instance, they have to comply to a new EU ruling, or Esperanza will know there are new card scheme rules. The issuers come with new things. PCI was, of course, a big thing. So often you have to kind of be acting reactive. But what I liked about implementing MCP at KLM, DCC would be the same, is that you become proactive. The challenge I saw is how can we change the payment department from a cost center to a revenue generator. And when I came across the opportunity to start implementing DCC or MCP, which means basically an ongoing revenue stream for the airlines. Once you implemented it, I really got enthusiastic. I always say, you work for a few months very hard to implement it, and then you sit back and you see the money rolling in, and that's a very nice thing. And if you're talking about an airline, what I liked as well, it got a lot of attention from senior management as well, CFO, CEO. They were very involved, and it was very nice. Probably the main challenge in offering it in your airline is that a lot of departments are involved. I myself was working for digital, but accounting is a very important department which is involved. Ticketing is involved. Treasury, of course, which all connects to acquirers, and web support as well. So whenever you start with this project, and seriously, in my 30 years at KLM, without exaggerating, this was the most fun and most rewarding project. But be sure to sit with your stakeholders, listen to their requirements, and come with the solution which fits into your organization. Now, one of the decisions which you have to deal with is, are you going to do it yourself? For instance, you could do it yourself if you have quite a sophisticated treasury department. Do you make use of PSS, or are you outsourcing it to a core business, a core provider for MCP or DCC services, like Continuum is? KLM opted for that. The good thing about that is that, of course, it seems maybe not so complicated to get rates of exchange in your organization, but also think of the management of the whole program and the settings of the program. KLM, we decided to outsource it. That also has to do with outsourcing risk. For us, the provider is responsible for providing the right rates of exchange. If you do it in-house, you have to make sure with the department who's servicing you that they constantly provide you with the right rates of exchange. Otherwise, it could be the case that you're making use of a wrong exchange rate. So think about those things if you make a decision. And yeah, I can tell from experience that it's probably better to work with a company which core business this is, so you can focus on your own work and basically on the revenue stream. Okay, so what is multi-currency services? Well, multi-currency services comes actually with two flavors, if you like. We will deep dive into a little bit later. It's either DCC or MCP. What does it do actually? So basically, you have a customer who's going to your website, and let's say this customer has a credit card which is issued by his bank in US dollars. He is on a website of an airline, and let's say it's a European website where this customer is buying a ticket of 1,000 euros. The airline, let's say it's in the Netherlands, it prices its ticket of 1,000 euros, and then normally without MCS, the payment goes as follows. The customer is paying in euros with his US dollar or credit card. Consequently, the bank of the cardholder, so the booker, the client, converts the euro amount into US dollars because he's charged in US dollars, and adds a markup. Depending on the payment option, the FX Forex markup is to be determined, also dependent by the issuing bank. And then the customer is charged in US dollars, and the airline is receiving the original currency in which it sold in euros. So that's the normal process without MCS. If an airline or a merchant is offering a multi-currency services, then the process is different. Let's take the same customer. He's again using his dollar issued credit card. He's still buying a ticket which is originally priced in 1,000 euros. However, he is opted to pay in his preferred currency, in his own currency, and that's US dollars. The airline does add the FX markup. We will come there later how they can do that and how high that can be. So in this case, the customer, you will see the ultimate price in dollars. So he pays, the payment itself is in dollars. The transaction is being processed in dollars, what we call like for like. The customer is charged in US dollars, so he will not see any FX fees on his card statement. And the airline can either determine to receive dollars as well or request euros. But the big difference with or without MCS is that the currency conversion and the markup shift is moving from the credit card issuing bank to the airline. Depending on what the airline charges, it is important to realize that there is no additional charge to the customer. It's just a shift in markup, and that's obviously what airlines like a lot. I think it's fair to say that airlines, as you probably know, operate at a thin margin. So being able to offer this financial auxiliary to customers, is a very nice issue and will bring you in some nice revenue as a merchant and as an airline specifically. So I already talked about two things, DCC, which stands for Dynamic Currency Conversion, and multi-currency pricing, MCP. Those are two options which you can offer. Basically, you see the difference between DCC and MCP here. I will not go over all the differences. I just want to highlight a few of them. The big difference between DCC and MCP MCP is that DCC is available for Visa and MasterCard only, as it uses part of the BIN range of the card and can then determine in what currency the card is issued. MCP can be offered with a lot of more payment options, not only with American Express and diners, but also with debit cards, with PayPal, with Apple Pay, with bank transfers. So with MCP you can reach out to more customers actually. Also, DCC is more regulated, much more regulated than MCP by the schemes. So you have to supply the mid rate which is used, and you have to supply on your website as well the markup which you are levying. This is not compulsory with MCP, so it's less regulated, and can be more easy for you, because sometimes it's difficult to explain this proposition on a website in 2 sentences to your customers. I mean, we as payment geeks, we understand it, but if maybe a person sees that he has to pay an X percentage of currency markup, and he is not aware that his card issuing bank is doing the same, he might be confused. So that's a difference. What is, I think, important, since DCC is working with the BIN range of the credit card, it can only be offered on the payment page, whereas MCP can be offered on the payment page, but also anywhere in the funnel. You can also offer MCP already at the first part of the customer journey, whereby you offer the customer the possibility to see all the prices in the customer journey in his or her preferred currency. Now, like I said, and what you see here on the side, both DCC and MCP are not an additional charge to the cardholder. That is, if the airlines price DCC or MCP in a fair way. They just replace the currency exchange process, which is applied by the card issuers. What you see here is you saw the 2 differences. What I would like to say is that one other thing was that you can combine MCP and DCC as well. We call that the hybrid model. This is also offered by Continuum, for instance, where you first show the MCP offer if you did not get an opt-in, and you can then still decide to offer DCC on the payment page if the BIN of the card allows you to offer DCC. Now, what are the benefits of multi-currency services, both MCP and DCC? What I really like about that is that it's you see here 4 reasons, that three of them are to the benefit of the customer. And I can remember when we implemented this at the airline I used to work for, also our marketing people who are not so aware of, let's say, finance, so to say, they liked it very much, because then we explained what's in it for the customer. First of all, it's transparency to the customer. I mean, think of that if you are on a holiday and you see something priced in a currency which you do not know. For you, it's difficult to understand the value of what you're buying, whether it's a meal or a souvenir. So if you see something which is priced in your own currency, you can relate much more to it, and that will therefore increase customer satisfaction and also the conversion of your website. So that is one. So the second one is assurance to the customer. Think here about the process. If you are able to process the transaction in the currency of the cardholder in which he will be charged, then at the moment of the checkout on your website, he or she will know what the final amount is he has to pay in his own currency. If he has to pay in a different currency, he has to await the statement of his card issuer in order to see what rate of exchange has been applied by his card issuer, and then he sees his final price. Now, most of the people, they like clarity, they like assurance. So also knowing this at that moment when you actually buy your ticket will increase customer satisfaction and therefore increase your sales. Now, like I said, depending on your strategy as a merchant or as an airline, it can mean a financial benefit to your customer. If you as a merchant, as an airline, decide to be on par or even a little lower with the FX markup as compared to what the issuers is doing, then it's also a financial benefit to your customer. Of course, it's up to you as a merchant how you want to charge it. What I can certainly recommend is not overcharge the customer. That's not good. And then last, but certainly not least, to you as a merchant, as an airline, MCB is a very, very nice additional revenue stream. Based upon experience, I can tell that for the airline I was working for, it was our biggest commission-based auxiliary. And with a commission-based auxiliary, I mean compared to, let's say, hotels, insurance, car rental. So that all yielded a very nice yearly revenue stream. I think we have been offering it now since 2015, still with the same supplier, Continuum. Very, very happy and yeah, very satisfied. We have been doing this.
Okay, well, thank you, Maarten, and it's always good to hear you say "we" because you can get the man out of the airline, not the airline out of the man, right? Okay.
Yes. Even the Eagles made a song after that, Paul. Correct. Well,
well, thanks for elaborating on that, and it's a very interesting topic, and especially because, like you said in the introduction, it's a revenue generator, whilst typically airlines only focus, let's say, on reducing costs. It's where you can shift the balance to revenue generation. So. Going back to Esperanza, no, we touched on the funnel, and an important part of the funnel is obviously the authorization, but also the 3D secure component. And you've done a lot of research on it. And first, we're going to read this out loud, right? Esperanza, no, we don't. So just for information.
Yeah.
Yeah. So. You brought quite a lot of data, 190 airlines for like a full year. So it's maybe 2/3 of the Visa Mastercard volume, but still it's massive volume, and you see a lot of interesting background in there. So could you run us through your slides, please?
Yeah. So this is the 3D adoption slide that we have prepared here. So basically, what we want to analyze here is how much airlines are using 3DS over the years. Obviously, we're skipping 2020 and 2021 because these were the years of COVID, so there were not real sales. There were only chargebacks and refunds, right? So focusing on the evolution from 2019, what we see is that their adoption is increasing, right? And when we look at adoption, we look at only the e-commerce transactions, so obviously only the website. But I think it's important to mention as well here that NDC, as such, is an e-commerce transaction these days as well, right? So what we see here could be airlines' websites or as well the NDC ecosystem. And we see the positive evolution. This is obviously in the back of the regulation in Europe that mandates to do 3DS authentication for certain type of transactions, etc. But it's also important to know that there are other geographies around the world that are also imposing regulation on 3DS, like Singapore, Malaysia, and a few other countries, right? So the more countries bring into that regulatory mandates, obviously the more adoption that we are going to be seeing. Now, what is important as well to mention here is that a lot of the airline transactions are still happening in moto channels, right? So by no means these adoptions are the total picture of the airline industry. As I said, we're just looking at the numbers for e-commerce. Moto is exempted in a number of markets and regulations, including Europe, for example, right? And something that we wanted to highlight as well is that this is something that is going to probably be revisited by the new upcoming regulation of PSD3 in Europe. And just to bring a little bit of context here, when PSD2 was brought into Europe, there was a lot of discussion about multi-channel, meaning travel agency transactions coming from GDS authorizations, etc. There was a lot of discussions about the technical difficulties to enable authentication on that side, but also technical difficulties to identify if the travel agency behind the transaction is an offline high street travel agency or if it's an online travel agency. And in the end, the conclusion was that at that point, it was not easy to identify or to differentiate the different travel agencies. So most of the travel agency bookings these days are considered Moto. The new regulation will probably revisit that position and will probably push the airline industry, the GDSs, IATA, ARC, etc., to be able to identify properly when is an online travel agency versus when is an offline travel agency, right? So watch that space, because we think that the new regulation will probably change the current status quo. But yes, what we see here is, as you mentioned, Paul, is a very aggregated picture of data from 190 airlines from all over the world, all sorts of airlines. So we have full service carriers, low-cost carriers, large, small, all of them all together. So if there are any airlines in the audience and they don't feel that they identify themselves with any of the numbers here, no worries. This is aggregated. This is not anybody's specific numbers. It's quite a lot of diverse compilation of data.
Yeah,
right?
and Esperanza, I think if they really want to do a deep dive, they can always contact you, right? If they want to know their own numbers or want to compare with their peer group, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And here it's a very interesting picture, because what we've done is an analysis of how 3DS and how authentication has an impact on approval rates and has an impact obviously on fraud and also on chargebacks. So if we look at the first table on the right-hand side at the top, this is the impact on the approval rates, right? So what we see is three different, let's say, scenarios. When the transactions have not been authenticated at all, or not even tried to be authenticated, and what you see is that the approval rate is 95%, 95.10. Then you have a second scenario, which is when there has been an attempt to authenticate, but it was not a successful authentication. And what you see here is that the approval rate is really low. That's probably a sign that the issuing bank does not trust that transaction that was not properly authenticated for whatever reason, and then they decline. And then, of course, you have the third scenario where the transaction is fully authenticated, and what you see is that obviously the approval rates are higher. We're talking about 95.34%. These are the numbers for the first quarter this year. So these are fresh from the oven numbers, if you will. And again, e-commerce transactions perform much better when you do the full authentication of
and Esperanza, I think there were, when as strong customer authentication 3Secure 2.x was introduced, I think there were two main concerns. One was that there would be a lot of drop-off, but also that if fully authenticated, that maybe the issuers would try to shy away from, let's say, the liability shift and might actually be like hesitant to do an authorization. So, but if I look at the numbers, then it looks, you don't see a lot of impact there, right?
Well, these are global numbers, right? So we have, sorry, the lights are coming out. Okay, now we go. The lights turn on with movement, sorry. So we are looking at global data here. When you look at the different markets and different geographies, the performance may be slightly different, right? Here is important to understand as well, in those markets where the regulation, not schemes, but the local regulatory banking industry, etc., mandates to do the authentication, approval rates go much, much higher. right? Everybody obviously embraces the mandates and everybody has to comply. In other geographies, when the schemes mandate the acquirers and the issuers to be able to obviously process authentication of transactions, etc., but there is no an enforcement from regulation, the performance is slightly different, right? And it also, it's important to look at as well at how airlines or merchants or their acquirers or the 3DS providers are populating the messages on the authentication. It is very important to ensure correct authentication and an improvement of the approval rates to make sure that all the data elements are passed on, that you are providing the issuer with as much information about that transaction as possible, just to reassure them, right? Especially in those markets where there's no legal enforcement, just put as much data as possible about the transaction. That will give them enough confidence about the authenticity of the transaction, and they will approve, right? If they have questions about those values or there are missing gaps of information, there is a risk of the issuer not approving the transaction.
And Esperanza, the EMV introduced also a travel extension with additional, let's say, travel itinerary data fields. Do you see an uptake in that? I've not heard about it for a long time, but do you see that?
Yes, we do. I mean, when you look at the huge amount of data fields that they can be populated, right? We see some airlines doing it or making use of those data elements much better than others. And that's what I'm saying, that as a merchant, please talk to your MPI providers, your 3DS providers, make sure that you are passing as much information about the device, the data points on the transaction, behavioral data, if you have it as well, because all those elements will definitely help to reassure the issuing bank about the transaction and the security of that transaction.
Do you have anything more on this slide? Otherwise, we go to the next.
Yeah, so just a couple of comments here. What you see as well is the impact on fraud. So as you can see clearly, fully authenticated transactions, fraud is minimum. Same applies for chargebacks. It is important to note here that we're looking at total chargebacks, so not just chargebacks from fraud, but all of it. We didn't split it up. So here you could have chargebacks for service not provided, for example, right? So that's why it looks a little bit higher. But again, minimum or no fraud whatsoever. And what you see is that there is a lot of fraud cases for those transactions where there was a 3DS attempted, which failed, right? That is a very good signal of a potential fraudster, right? What we look at here in this new slide is a slightly different picture because we're looking at, okay, where are those fraudulent transactions coming from, right? And what we have is a table of top markets where the most fraud number of transactions are coming from. And it's quite interesting because 85% of all the airline fraud reported transactions come from the United States and Brazil. You could argue, well, the United States is obviously the biggest market in terms of airline industry. Okay, yes, fair enough, that's right. But when you look at the fraud rate, is significantly higher, right? Apart from just the isolation of the total volume, the fraud rate is higher. The same applies in Brazil, right? So the recommendation here is obviously to enable 3DS to protect yourself, strengthen your fraud tools in these two markets for cards issued in these two geographies. You see the fraud in the United Kingdom or the fraud in other markets like France or Philippines, and it's much lower, right? So those key markets are the ones that we would recommend airlines to focus on.
And I think you do some great work in visualizing also the GDS authorization versus the acquired authorization. I find that fascinating. But so there's a difference in authorization rate, but also in fraud rate. Maybe in a nutshell, you can explain what the main differences are between the two. Right.
So the main difference is basically the card types, I would say. In the GDS authorization flow, these are travel agency transactions typically, and you will have a lot of corporate cards. In the acquire authorization side, you have the airline websites, you have the call centers, or maybe airport offices, etc., where there is more consumer card. Fraud on consumer cards is 10 times larger than fraud on corporate cards, right? So that explains the difference. There's also another element, which is that in the GDS authorization flow, in the travel agency flow, a lot of the cards are on a card on file, right? They are not necessarily easy to, let's say, steal your numbers or pass on the numbers and so on. On the acquire side, as I said, is more consumer-facing environment, and you are going to have more consumer cards.
Yeah,
that's why the larger differences.
Okay, well, that was very, very, very good. Thank you very much for that. I'm looking at the time. I think we have to keep on going. And James, I'm not sure if you can hear me, but I can't see the Q&A. Or maybe it's a new version of Zoom, but I can't see the questions. Maybe you can have a look.
Maarten raised the hand. Do we allow the questions at the end or no?
The idea is to do it at the end. Yeah.
At the end, perfect.
Yeah. So we looked at MCPDC, multi-currency services, at the role of authentication. So the third topic that we had shortlisted for today is the role of tokenization and being very much integrated into the whole flow that you orchestrate, Suby, with Finmont. Maybe you can give us a bit of a tokenization 101. And by the way, many thanks to Sandra Miranda from Paperworks, because she made available one of her many very nice infographics, and especially on this topic, there's so many angles into this. So maybe you can use it as a starting point, Suby, to explain the role of tokenization, especially maybe look at, for instance, the role of, and maybe Esperanza can add there as well, the network tokenization or scheme tokenization, what that will bring to the industry.
Sure. So basically, tokenization is taking your card number as an input and generating a random key using some algorithm, and use that particular key in subsequent transactions, as you can see in the diagram. But as you see, the tokenization happens in different stages of the whole payment authorization flow. So you can see from the Finmont side, what we do is like orchestrator, you can call it orchestrator token. So that means the moment, this will also help you in some cases to be away from PCI compliance. So that means if we are doing this, you don't need to be PCI compliant because you're not touching any card data. So here, from our side, we create the token out of the customer's credit card, and then by the time we are sending it to different acquirers or payment service providers or payment gateways, we detokenize it and send the information to them. And then in some cases, they also tokenize it. So that is why you see here below the screen, there are multiple tokens. As you can see, payment token, merchant token. So in a way, we do the merchant token if merchant is using us completely. And then you can see acquirer token. So the acquirer token is done by acquirer. So that means that token is very specific to that particular acquirer. And then the interesting part is network token, because it is supposed to increase the approval rates using the network token, because networks acts as a kind of a hub between all the players, both the issuers and acquirers. So that means if you have a network token, so that means all the data transfer between acquirer and issuer is secure. The same way, compared to acquirer token to the token issued by orchestrator. For example, if an orchestrator make a token, it works with all the acquirers or payment service providers or gateways that you are connected with, because we are also acting as a hub at the starting of the transaction. And then, as you see, there is also issuer tokens. So these are basically different types of tokens. And maybe Esperanza can enlighten us more about how network tokens can improve the authorization rates.
Right. Okay. So there's various elements to explain why. Obviously, first is security. As I previously mentioned, the more reassurance the issuing bank has about the security of a transaction, the better approval rate. So for them, knowing that this is a network token rather than the PAN being used on the transactions, etc., is definitely an important element here. The other element as well, and this plays both in a card on file, but also in a guest checkout scenario, is that when you use a tokenized card, right, you avoid the card holder having to type the card number again, right? And that's important because one of the things that we see in our data is that 10% of the declines are due to human errors. Most of them because the card holder inputs the wrong card number when they go into the payment page, or because they put wrong the expiration date. In some cases, it could also be that there is a merchant token rather than the network token, and that merchant token has expired and the information has not been refreshed. So you use the token when doing the authorization, and then you're going to get a decline telling you the transaction or the card was expired or the token was expired. So with network tokenization, you reduce those elements. You reduce the friction of the possible human errors or typing wrong information. You make sure that all your tokens are up to date at any point in time because the tokens are on our side and we refresh the information. And at the same time, excuse me, the transaction is completely secure. So those three elements play a part in the overall approval rate. So definitely network tokenization is a way to improve the overall sales and the approval rates of the airline industry.
And I think Esperanza, especially for those travel merchants that have like card on file or do recurring payments, that's where the refreshing the account updater role, let's say, plays an important role, which will definitely also help to improve your overall acceptance rate.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. This is a very complicated topic and there's a lot of detail, and I think also the use cases in travel overall, if it's hospitality, if it's travel agencies and airlines, are very complex. So definitely an area where you need to submit a lot of resource to make sure that it all works end to end. Okay, let's continue. So wrapping up pretty much this session. So a couple of industry news items that I just want to briefly share, and Maarten, there's something in here that's also close to our heart. So Uber, the ride-hailing service, announced that they will start in the US to start off with open banking account-to-account transfers to pay for your rides. And no, we've had discussions about how to incentivize the customer to actually, let's say, shift away from their card to an account-to-account. And I think here in the red circle, I think it's quite interesting to see that Uber offers 40% off for the next 2 rides if you actually try it out. So I think, does that appeal to you as well, Maarten?
Correct. Yeah, that's correct.
Mm-hmm. So that's I think that's an interesting development there that might open the travel industry up to let's say account-to-account. Item number 2. And that's also something that I follow closely, but IATA is very active in trying to shift back control to the airlines, for instance, when it comes to payments, and also to enable or to enhance services that have been around for a long time. For instance, the IATA currency clearance service, not known to a lot of people, used to be only for IATA BSP cash, so for the billing between travel agencies and airlines, but now also card transactions can be routed over those rails. So if you're interested, check it out. It's on the IATA website. And finally, we had last week an event in Malta organized by Perseus and Actuary. And one of the topics that I found was quite fascinating is that the amount of fraud happening during in-flight transactions is actually very high. And I know, Esperanza, this is also a topic that you have been studying quite closely. Any surprise for you there?
Well, the surprise to me was that there is people that are professionals of this type of fraud, right? So this is what they do. Basically, they just book 2 or 3 flights during the same day. They just go from one city to the other one, buying goods. So we're not talking necessarily here about buying a sandwich or a gin tonic, but more like buying alcohol, tobacco, and expensive goods that they can actually resell afterwards. And they just operate with either cards with no money or fake cards, etc. So yes, it's a well-known problem, and there's a couple of initiatives within MasterCard right now at the moment trying to tackle potential solutions. One of them is how these type of cards could be blocked at point of sale, up in the air. It's a challenge because, as we know, most of these transactions are processed offline anyway, but there are means and there are ways where the POS devices could perhaps recognize certain pins or certain card types. So we're exploring different solutions, trying to find a fix for this very well-known problem.
Yeah, it's also part of the wider, let's say, chasing, the fraud and trying to keep up with them, right? Because they're always coming up with creative new ways to defraud merchants. So yeah, and I think like the screenshot here, moving online definitely opens up opportunities to be more on top of things, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. Having touched on those three things, and so I can't see the question. Maybe Suby, can you see the questions?
Yes. I mean, there is
maybe you can guide us through some of the questions. Yeah.
Yes. So I think Maarten asked quite a lot of questions. So maybe we can give him control because he raised the hand and he can, ask them directly if it's possible.
Yeah, sure. The first one is quite general.
Maarten Skulek, I thought it's easy if we give him control. If not, I will read the question.
No. You have to read the questions out loud. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Then let me do that. Can you explain the approval rate on e-com channel? I don't understand the 73.81% of 3DS attempted and failed.
Yeah. Okay, so we can explain that. So we're talking here about a scenario where there has been some sort of 3DS attempt, but failed, meaning the authentication was not completed properly. Even though the authentication was not completed, the merchant or the acquirer sent the transaction for authorization to the issuing bank, and the transaction was approved. So how is that possible? Well, because 3DS is not mandatory in lots of countries, right? So for a lot of issuers, even though they do not see the authentication transaction attached to the authorization request, they can still apply the transaction because it's not mandatory over there, right? And this is what I explained, that the data that we were showing there is global, is worldwide. When you look at different markets and different geographies, their behaviors are very different, right? So it's important to consider whether in that particular region or in that particular market, 3DS is mandatory. When you look at that same picture for Europe, if you have the 3DS authentication and it failed, your approval rate is going to be 30%. Really low.
Esperanza, maybe it's good to explain that failed can be not completed, but can also be failed in like that you put in the wrong password, or that the biometric check is not complete. Because if I remember correctly, if you put in the wrong password and it then you're not supposed to continue to authorization, right? But if you could not complete that, I think there's two flavors there, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. And again, I think some of the merchants and 3DS providers will have different rules in terms of what do we do when the authentication fails? Do we stop the transaction there? You should do that, for example, in Europe. But in other geographies where 3DS is not necessarily mandatory, it's up to the merchant to decide whether making their own risk assessment, if they want to still send the transaction for authorization.
Yeah. Because also the liability shift plays a role there. You basically abandon the liability shift there. Correct. Okay, Suby, any more questions?
And for Maarten, the another question is, could you share any percentage numbers related to the revenues generated through MCP DCC by airlines?
Yeah, I understand the question. This is also from Maarten Skulek. I can't obviously mention any clear, let's say, clear amounts, but what you can see is if I look at how we did it at KLM, and it very much depends on what type of airline you are and where you operate. But what I can see that about 20% of all transactions were eligible for DCC MCP, which what do I mean with that is that 1 out of every 5 transactions, a cardholder had a different currency than the currency on the website, and the opt-in of those 20% was between 40 and 50%. So then you can do the math based upon the sales of an airline. Looking at the online sales, you can do the math, take into account the FX margin which an airline can levy. But again, what I can share is that at least for our airline, it was by far the biggest commission-based ancillary we had.
And I think, Maarten, if you talk to a provider in this space, that one of the first things they will do is request data to basically crunch the numbers and to see what the business case looks like, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good point, Paul. Again, I know Continuum does that, and that helps an airline making the business case. It's quite easy to do a file analysis, and based upon that information, Continuum can do the calculation what the potential is, and often that is being used to prioritize a project for the airline for MCP and DCC because they know what's out there.
Okay.
Another interesting question from Chris is, what are FX risk and accounting considerations for MCP? Fares are filed in euro, but airline receive dollar.
Yeah, also this question is a good one, but not a simple one. It very much depends on what type of airline you are. Again, if I'm talking about KLM, we had quite a sophisticated treasury setup. What I mean with that is that KLM is managing about 40 till 50 currencies themselves. So for them, it was easy to receive many different currencies because they hold books, FX books in those currencies. If you are a smaller airline and you don't have this kind of sophisticated treasury setup like a bank, then there are ways to work with your acquirers or with FX banks to have it hedged, if you prefer that. In that case, if you still want to receive euro in that example, that's quite well possible. He's also talking about accounting. Very fair point. Accounting is almost one of the biggest bottlenecks. There are also ways to circumvent that. Again, the airline I worked for, we have been able, what we called, to reprice the ticket. So in this case, we were not issuing the ticket in euros, but in dollars. So that made it easier for accounting department as well, because the outstanding was in dollars and the receivable were in dollars. So basically what I want to say, there are a lot of flavors which can be tackled in various ways. Happy to take that offline as well, but it very much depends on the capabilities and the requirements of an airline, but all can be tackled.
Yes. I mean, to add on top of
one more
that,
question, Suby.
Yes, I just want to add one point on top of that. With our experience with integrating with FX risk solutions. So it's all based, I mean, what I have observed is there is some concepts like micro hedge. That is, you are hedging your transaction on each transaction based, right? The moment the transaction happens. In some cases, you bundle it. So all these things, what I've seen is there are some modern solutions. For instance, we are connected with one solution called Cantox. They have this treasury solution where you can see what is your risk appetite, for example, and which euros which currency you want to take in and which currency you want to pay out. So I think it's also nice to see all these solutions, to compare them and see what fits to your risk appetite.
Yeah. I think in summary, I think it's good to have currency management, FX management as part of your payment strategy, right? And
Yes.
because it is an important part of it from a risk perspective, from a cost perspective, also from a revenue perspective. So it should be an integrated part of it. So maybe one more question?
Yeah, the last important question is also, how can we register for future presentations? It's a simple one. I mean, we will send you a registration link to all of the participants so that you can register for all the subsequent webinars. And yeah, And then it's
Okay.
also in Finmont LinkedIn page. We always posting it like 3 weeks before. You can also register from there. So these are the two ways.
Okay. Thank you, Suby, for running the questions. So time for the next session. So we have selected out of the remaining topics, back office reporting and reconciliation. The date will be May 30th, so about a month from now, and we'll touch on many of the mid and back office processes. Speakers still to be announced, but keep an eye on your mailbox if you have registered for this event, but also on the media that I already showed, so the YouTube channel, but also the page on LinkedIn for this event. So with that, I would love to thank the guests, the speakers for this event very much for your participation, for your contribution, and looking forward to the next time in about a month's time. So thank you very much and have a good day.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks a
Bye-bye.
lot. Bye.
Thank you, Esperanza.
No worries. All done, right? Okay, cool.
Yeah, we're done. Thank you.
All right, I'm leaving now. Okay, bye.
Okay, bye.